Cool. Okay. Look, before I start, I just want to commend the previous speakers. Lens Science is a world-leading program, as Jackie suggested, and the fact it's been picked up in other places such as Lord Winston in the UK. Fantastic program. If you ever get the opportunity as a scientist to participate in it, please do, because we want this to always be around. Mark, from day one in September 2010, was really integral to the media's coverage of the earthquakes, and since then has been an ever-present figure in the media, one of our best science communicators. A couple of weeks ago I was in Christchurch launching Science Media Savvy, which is a 2-day workshop for scientists, from emerging researchers through to professors, to really upskill so that they're confident dealing with the media. So if anyone wants to hear more about that, we can talk about that a bit later. My preoccupation is the media. I'm a former journalist. I was a journalist on the New Zealand Herald. And the media is undergoing huge change. Its business model has been turned upside down. There's this issue of fragmentation. There's so many screens now, so many different ways of accessing information. This is just relating to people who own smartphones, and there's now 2.7 million people in New Zealand with a smartphone. It is becoming the first screen for the majority of people accessing the internet in New Zealand. And this is how they're doing it on their smartphones. A lot of them are going straight through a dedicated news app. Nearly 89% of us have an app, a Google Android or a App Store app on our phone where we're accessing news. We're accessing it through aggregators, and the biggest one is Google News. That's the ultimate aggregator. And we're doing it through social media as well. All of this stuff, as Mark pointed to in his presentation, is starting to eclipse traditional sources of accessing the media. And this is really relevant to you guys because traditionally, the public has got most of its information about science from the mainstream media, and that is starting to change. And if you don't adapt to that change, you're going to be left behind. If you look on salon.com today, unfortunately I didn't have time to put it in my slide. There's a great story on salon.com today. It's called "Google Has Officially Eaten the Newspaper Industry." 2011, Google's revenue was $37 billion US. In 2011, the US newspaper industry and magazine industries combined advertising revenue was $41 billion US. Back in 2004, Google was doing $200 million in revenue, and the newspaper and magazine industry in the States was doing $70 billion in revenue. It's been eaten alive by the internet. That's the fundamental that's driving the change. The guy who wrote that Salon.com article, he thought this was quite ironic because 5 years ago he went to a panel discussion a bit like this, where the heads of newspapers were sitting there alongside Google, and Google was saying, "We're your best friend. Put your stuff on Google News. You know, we'll get more eyeballs to your stuff." And the CEO of Associated Press, Gary Pruitt, was on the panel, and he said, "We're not too worried about this change, the rise of the internet. We take comfort from Charles Darwin's observation that it's not the strongest species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most responsive to change. We just need to be adaptable." Well, the media didn't adapt. It's not adapting quickly enough. I spent a day going around all the media organisations in Auckland, and boy, what a buzzkill it was. The first guy I went to see was clearing out his office. He's in his mid-40s, and he's decided that there's no future to the media, so he's going to do an MBA at university. The second guy I went to visit was trying to figure out how to put up a paywall on his news organisation so he could start charging for every click, because advertising revenue is going through the floor. And the third couple of people I went to see had just come back from a meeting where they've been discussing the future of the media organisation. In other words, how many people are going to have to lay off. This is these aggregators I was talking about. This is the front page of Reddit, the science page of Reddit. And this is how a lot of people are discovering their news now. They're not going to the Herald or TV3 news websites. They're finding it through aggregators. And the crowd is deciding what is the popular news by voting up the stories. So the one that gets voted up by the crowd is the one that gets seen the most, not what gets put on the New Zealand Herald website. What all of this is meaning for the media this huge change in the economics of it is that the media is incredibly fragile economically. And this year really is a sea change for the media in our part of the world in terms of the sustainability of it. We saw a few months ago, Fairfax came out, 1,900 job losses. They're going to put the Melbourne Age and the Sydney Morning Herald behind paywalls from next year. And most worryingly, this woman here, Gina Reinhardt, has bought a big chunk of Fairfax, about 18%, and she's demanding more seats on the board of Fairfax. She's one of the richest women in the world. She's worth about $30 billion. She's a mining magnate, and she is a climate skeptic as well. And she is increasingly trying to use Fairfax to push her views on business, on science, on environmental issues, all sorts of things. 100 years ago, this wouldn't have mattered too much. We had big proprietors who also had other interests. But when the media is as fragile as it is now, this sort of stuff is starting to influence editorial, which is really scary for how science is covered. We're also seeing major change here in New Zealand with, for instance, the disappearance of TVNZ7. There was a great show on there called Ever Wondered, where a team went around the country and interviewed scientists. Unfortunately, that won't ever happen again because that sort of show just will not work on commercial TV. We've potentially got good old Paul coming back to front the replacement for Close Up, if you can imagine that, like breakfast in the evening. At the moment, we've got a show that does, you know, for all its flaws and faults, does a reasonably good job of covering the current affairs. That's going to be lighter, a lot fluffier, more of an entertainment show from now on. And that's a real important signal of where news is going and where mainstream news is going. They're having to compete with the entertainment and infotainment that the internet serves up because there's so many screens for people to watch. Ironically, as a result of that, belatedly, the media is trying to adapt. They're going, oh my God, our share price is through the floor. And just on that note, the share value of Fairfax, the entire Fairfax group, which publishes the Sunday Star Times, the Sydney Morning Herald, the Dominion Post, all of those papers, is now worth less than the share value of Trade Me, which it bought back in 2007. That's just staggering. Who'd have thought that a little auction company like that would now be worth more than the entire half the media in New Zealand and Australia? But what they're doing is belatedly they're going, oh my God, we need to change. The Herald, after 160 years of being a broadsheet, has gone tabloid and is trying to do high-minded news. So they're coming to us all the time at the Science Media Centre looking for experts who can write high-quality content. So there's opportunities opening up for scientists there. The Dominion Post has just started a science page. We had a call from the editor saying we have a science page every week. Who's good at writing about science? So there are opportunities now for freelancers and for scientists who are motivated to actually get their science out there. And if the content's free, all the better, because the media doesn't have any money anymore. Mike Quigley is a perfect example of a motivated scientist who is getting acres of media space. A few weeks ago there was that decision out of Italy about the manslaughter charges that the scientists were convicted of, and a public official, Mark, very quickly wrote a piece and submitted this to the press. He got the next day a full page in the press devoted to his writing, about 1,000 words. He submitted it to an Australian website called The Conversation, and that's a website that sends out, publishes columns from scientists. That was picked up by the New Zealand Herald, and he got a full page in the Herald the following day. This is prime real estate in our biggest newspapers, and the reason they're running it is because it's high quality content and it's free. And scientists who can get their head around this are going to have huge opportunities to expose themselves and their science to the public. There's a new section on the Stuff website, Ask a Scientist. We're getting flooded with questions from Fairfax that readers are asking, and they're coming to us saying, can you find us a scientist who can answer this question? And some of them are really elementary, simple questions. Others are a bit more complex, but there's an opportunity there for scientists to get their name out there in answering these types of questions. What we did in 2009, when we didn't really see much public discourse on science going on, is we set up Sciblogs.co.nz, and that's a platform of about 30 scientists blogging about their areas of science and about topical science-related issues. So we've got scientists on there like David Winter, an evolutionary biologist, and he's been one of our most successful bloggers. One of our most successful individual posts was a post that David did related to the earthquakes again. This was Ken Ring when he came out in March of 2011 with these crazy earthquake predictions. And David posted a quite lengthy and detailed piece outlining how Ken Ring can't predict earthquakes. And he gave the science behind it. And that went ballistic in the media, and Mike did some commentary on that as well. David is now writing stories for Fairfax, for stuff, and getting paid for them. He's in demand as a freelance science writer on top of his actual science. One of our other bloggers, Anna Sandiford, is a forensic scientist. She deals with blood splatter and extracting pollen from people's noses so you can tell where the body has been dumped and how long it's been there. She's been blogging about forensics and has, as a result of her blogging activity, has a much greater media profile now, to the extent that she was approached to write a book last year, and her first book was published, Expert Witness, and the route they came to find her was through her blogging activity. And this is on top of her science. She has her own forensics business. She's an honorary researcher here at Auckland University. But on top of that, she's devoted to doing a bit of blogging, and that has resulted in her being invited all over the world to talk at conferences, and her first book being published. Sean Hendy is another one of our bloggers, and Sean has done an interesting thing. He has written a book in conjunction with the late Professor Sir Paul Callaghan, and he fleshed out chapters of the book on Sciblogs. He came up with a couple of ideas for chapters. He'd write a post, he'd get feedback from the Sciblogs community and from the public on his post, and that will form the basis of the book that's going to be published in the next few months. You know, there's a bit of a rise of this stuff happening. One of the best sort of science communication endeavours that's coming out of Auckland University at the moment is Stats Chat. Great website. Thomas Lumley in the Department of Statistics is just analysing how the media treats statistics, and often they do a really poor job of using statistics, and he's calling them out on it. And this has led to Thomas going and giving workshops with New Zealand Herald journalists to help them in their use of statistics. So check it out if you haven't. It's statschat.org.nz. We're seeing this around the world. The vacuum is starting to be filled by scientists doing their own thing proactively, because they're seeing the ability of the media to do this sort of stuff diminish. Scienceblogs.com is the biggest science blog platform in the world. We model Sciblogs on it. So there's about 60 bloggers on there. Ferangula, PZ Myers is the most famous of them. He gets millions and millions of visits every month. And his personality as a scientist is now intermingled with his personality as a blogger, his brand, if you like. There's a conversation I mentioned. Any of you can submit to the conversation. You can register, get a profile there. It's run out of Australia, but they want New Zealand content as well. And as Mark discovered, if your content is on the conversation, it will be shared with any media organisation in the world. They can take that under a Creative Commons license. So your stuff will end up in the mainstream media. You know, the ultimate scientist or doctor as brand is Ben Goldacre, one of the best science communicators out of the UK. He started off as a Guardian columnist with Bad Science, then the book Bad Science, and the blog Bad Science. And, you know, branding 100 years ago was something we did to a cow. 50 years ago it was something you related to a product through. Now you are the brand. And that's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, it's just the way it is. We now live our lives on the internet and project ourselves through social media and various other channels, and how you come across will determine how people react to what you're saying. And Goldacre has an incredibly powerful brand, and it allows him to sell his books, to maintain his standing in the media. He's on TED Talks, he's doing all sorts of things, and it's all contributing to the Goldacre brand. And just finally, you know, someone else who is building a brand for himself is Keith Ng, the freelance writer. 3 weeks ago he was all over the media because he's the guy who broke the story about the exploits in the kiosks at the WINS offices, and how there was a backdoor into looking through the central file system of the Ministry of Social Development. And Keith, probably before that story was published, the average New Zealander didn't know who he was, but he was beavering away on that story. He broke it on his blog on Public Address, which is the blog network run by Russell Brown. And the mainstream media picked up on it, and it went nuts, that story, and the repercussions of that will unfold. That day, he has a crowdfunding service, givealittle.co.nz, and he said to readers, if you like that story, if you think I did good journalism there, put some money in my virtual tip jar. And they did, and that day he raised about $5,000. I think all up, Keith got about $7,000 out of it, which is why Chris Keel at the National Business Review said for one day only he was the best paid journalist in the country, because journalists aren't paid well, but Keith did well. And I think this is really the start of something new in the media and in the new media, whereby we've been struggling, and all the guys I met today are all bashing their head on their desk trying to figure out what is the future of the media, what's going to stop them slipping down the plug hole. And I think increasingly they need to stop thinking about that and start looking out. News can come from anywhere now, and they need to embrace that, and they haven't adapted. People like Keith are adapting. He does a little bit of mainstream media, he does mainly new media stuff, he wears several hats, but he makes it work. And increasingly I think that's how the media is going to operate. And for you as scientists, the better able you are at adapting to this new media environment, the more willing you are to put yourself out there, maybe a little bit of blogging if you're into that, maybe just tweeting a little 90-second video. The more savvy you are about communicating your science through non-traditional means, the better you can adapt. I think the better your career as a scientist is going to ultimately be. Thanks for that.
Thank you.